UCL research, some highlights of that to give you ideas about what you might want to think about doing with 2021-22 data. So 2021 in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, 2022 in Scotland. So a couple of pieces of work on ethnicity. So these are newspaper articles from the work of Safran Carlson, Being a Muslim in Europe, Attitudes and Experiences. Oops. Okay. And Safran showed intergenerational economic mobility between 71 and 2011 and looked at downward and upward social mobility. And there was more downward and less upward social mobility among Black Caribbean, Indian Sikhs and Muslim people with Bangladeshi, Indian, Pakistani ethnicities relative to white British groups. But because one of the benefits of the LS is that you can look at data in quite granulated way, she also identified there was more positive relative progress among Indian Hindu people. There's an interplay between ethnicity and religion. There's some variation in experiences of social mobility between individuals, even in the same ethnic group. So the data allows you to get beyond the sort of homogeneous view of particular groups. Conversely, this is work by Zikotti et al., Employment, Youth and Ethnicity, Exploring Trends in Labour Market Economics. And this was looking at Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi and Caribbean origins relative to those of white British individuals. And as unsurprising, being employed or inactive in youth, so being NEET, reduces employment opportunities in later life. Indian and Bangladeshi men were substantially less affected by previous non-employment compared to white British men. So it's kind of flipping the way we might look at ethnicity. Whereas for women, and here we can look at gender as well separately, having any ethnic minority background continued to limit labour market integration. And then moving on to some work by Sacker et al. This is evidence that was quoted in the Independent Review of Children's Social Care, and Emily Murray, who's here today and speaking later, is one of the co-authors on this. Adults who spent time in care between 1971 and 2001 were 70% more likely to die prematurely and also experience non-natural death. You've got lower rates of long-term illness and higher rates of employment for adults with a history of kinship care. And so that means the difference is between care leavers in residential care compared to adults who live in foster care. So it compares those who live in kinship care compared to those who live in who have not lived in care. And it's this idea again that you can look at a fine-grained granularity within a particular group. And I'm going to skip over that one so we can catch up a little. And then moving over to some work currently going on in Northern Ireland. Air pollution, health and mortality. Neil Rowland is our new regional clean air champion for Northern Ireland, and Neil is also in the audience. That's a tweet from UKRI there advertising that. It's looking at ambient air pollution in Northern Ireland. And also one of the benefits of the Northern Ireland data, you can link to prescriptions and death events. This is work by Ian Shuttleworth, also in the audience, also Scots and Irish language in Northern Ireland. And it's looking at the characteristics. And we've done some work, Celsius have done some work looking at Welsh language speakers, which we've presented in Ireland. And now I'm going to present stuff on Irish language speakers here in Wales. So knowledge of people with also Scots are usually older than 50 and male. They're likely to have someone else in their household who also knows the language, which kind of is intuitive. You've got someone to talk to, you're more likely to know a particular language, more likely to be Protestant, have degree level education and live in the northeast of Northern Ireland and have a British or Scottish national identity. Conversely, those who had Irish language are more likely to be young, aged 11 to 15, born in the Republic of Ireland, Catholic or other or no religion, Irish national identity, degree level of education, and had others, again, to speak with within the household. There was geographical variation, which I'm not going to go into for expediency of time, but a lot of young people learning Irish. Work by Zhang et al. This is work that the Northern Ireland longitudinal study and the Scottish longitudinal study, your neighbours and your work colleagues can potentially have an influence on behaviour known as peer effect. Now, Emily is both my neighbour and my colleague, quite what that means. And we were on the same train today. Imitative behaviour can cause small initial change in individual behaviour to spread among social networks and introduce a social multiplier effect. So we want to look at the size of that effect, and does that actually affect one's own fertility choices? And are those perhaps stronger in Northern Ireland than they would be in Scotland? This work from the Scottish longitudinal study, Cherry et al., and involves Chris Dibben, who's also here. So in Scotland, the highest concentrations of particular pollutant were roughly 10 times higher. So we need to understand the lifetime effect of pollution, not just what pollution is now, those raised in a period of war and economic depression. And this was associated with lifetime social mobility and mediated by early life cognitive ability. And then school attendance in Scotland, all dimensions of a low socioeconomic background increase the risk of overall absenteeism from school for all forms. So that's sickness-based, truancy, exclusion, except family holidays, and that's presumably because those with more resources are much likely to be more to be absent for family holidays, and that's an ESRC SDAI. And then Institute Fiscal Studies. This is something that covers Northern Ireland, Scotland, and England and Wales. The IFS Dayton Review, Craftman et al. According to the 2019 annual report on health inequalities in Northern Ireland, there's a 7.1 year difference in life expectancy between men living in the most and least deprived areas. And the healthy life expectancy declined in this period. And remember, this is pre-COVID. We know there's been a decline in life expectancy in the very recent past, but it goes back further than that. And this is echoed in other countries around the world as well. So it's looking at certain risk factors, drug-related and alcohol-specific mortality in the most deprived areas, around 4.5 times the rate seen in the least deprived. And never been before a comparison of socioeconomic communities across the 4 countries of the UK together. It's one of the strengths of the LS that they can do that. But if we fast forward to 2032, and we think what might be the highlights, what might be the headlines and the reports we might see in 10 years' time when we're in Cardiff, Belfast, wherever we might be. I've gone for Forgotten Your Homework, a comparison of employment between Scotland in 2022, employment location, and Northern Ireland and England and Wales in 2021. Because of the different timing of the 2 censuses, we can look at whether people who worked in particular occupations at home during lockdown of 2021 were actually similar people were in work at home or perhaps in a different position in 2022 in Scotland. So the discontinuity in time actually offers an opportunity here. Look who's talking. We can look at Ulster Scots, Irish, Welsh, but also Scots, Gaelic and Scots. 2001 to 2021, 2022. So look over the long run, how those languages are changing. Who do you think you are? We've got national identity questions for the second time. We can look at how national identity changes over time. We know that people's ethnicity changes potentially when they start describing it themselves to what their parents or the head of household has described them when they're a child. Does the same happen with national identity? And finally, may the force be with you. Veterans employment destinations, this is my own particular interest. What happens to veterans, and we know have this question for the first time, after they've left the army, where did they work? And also what happens to their partner's employment status, because they're no longer geolocated where they were potentially previously. Thank you.